I walked into Chez Laurent 20 minutes late, spotting my family at the corner table immediately. My sister Emma was already holding court, her voice carrying across the restaurant as she gestured dramatically with her wine glass. Her fiancé Marcus sat beside her, nodding. Along with that practiced smile wealthy people use when they want to appear interested. My parents looked uncomfortable in their Sunday best, clearly out of place in this upscale establishment. Emma noticed me first, her face lighting up with that particular gleam she got whenever she sensed an opportunity to perform. She stood up, spreading her arms wide in mock celebration, and announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Look everyone, my little brother finally decided to show up." Sorry we're late starting the celebration, but Jed here was probably busy with some very important filing. The laughter that followed Emma's announcement felt like needles in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm as I took the empty seat across from her. This was nothing new. Emma had been the star of our family since childhood, the one who effortlessly drew attention and praise while I quietly worked my way through school with my head down and my mouth shut. Our parents had always marveled at Emma's social skills, her ability to charm teachers and neighbors alike. She was homecoming queen, student body president, the daughter who brought home boyfriends they could brag about to their friends. Meanwhile, I spent my teenage years buried in law books, working nights at the local grocery store to save money for college applications. When Emma got into State University on a partial cheerleading scholarship, the whole neighborhood heard about it. When I received a full academic scholarship to Harvard, my parents quietly mentioned it to a few close relatives. "So Marcus," Emma continued, settling back into her seat with theatrical flair, "this is the brother I told you about, the one with the very stable government job." She emphasized the word stable in a way that made it sound like code for boring and dead end. "Jed works downtown in one of those big official buildings, doing very important paperwork." Marcus extended his hand across the table with the confident grip of someone accustomed to closing deals. His Rolex caught the restaurant's ambient lighting, and his tailored suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Emma's told me so much about you," he said, though his tone suggested the information hadn't been particularly flattering. "Investment banking keeps me pretty busy, but I always respect people who choose the public sector. Takes a certain kind of person to be satisfied with that level of income." The condescension in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. I shook his hand and managed a neutral smile, remembering countless similar interactions over the years. People made assumptions based on limited information, and I had learned long ago that correcting those assumptions often created more problems than it solved. "Tell Marcus about your apartment," Emma urged, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "It's so quaint, very minimalist. You know, when you can't afford much furniture, less really is more." Our father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly wishing Emma would dial back the cruelty, but lacking the authority or confidence to intervene. Our mother focused intently on her salad, a familiar coping mechanism from years of family dinners that turned into Emma showcases. "I like simple living," I replied quietly, which only seemed to encourage Emma further. "Simple is definitely the word," she laughed, reaching over to pat Marcus's arm. "Jed's always been the practical one in the family, never one to reach too high or dream too big. Some people are just natural followers, you know. They find their comfortable little niche and stay there forever." Marcus nodded along, though I caught him studying my face with slightly more interest than his casual demeanor suggested. "What exactly do you do in the courthouse district?" he asked. "I mean specifically, administrative work." I answered, which was technically true if you considered running a federal courthouse to be administrative in nature. "See?" Emma clapped her hands together delightedly. "I told you he was modest about it." Though honestly, there's not much to be immodest about, is there? But Jed's always been the type to make the best of whatever situation he finds himself in. The conversation drifted toward Marcus's work, and I learned that he specialized in corporate mergers and acquisitions. Pulling down what he casually mentioned was a comfortable, mid-six-figure salary. Emma beamed with pride as he described his latest deal involving the acquisition of a chain of luxury hotels across the Southeast. The commission alone from that deal will pay for our honeymoon, Emma gushed. We're thinking Tuscany, maybe the Amalfi Coast. Somewhere sophisticated, somewhere that matches our lifestyle. Marcus smiled indulgently and reached into his jacket pocket, producing a small, velvet box. Actually, I was hoping to make this dinner extra special, he said, opening the box to reveal a diamond ring that caught the light like a small star. Emma, will you marry me? The proposal was clearly staged for the family's benefit, since Emma's delighted shriek suggested she had been expecting it. She thrust her hand across the table for our parents to admire the ring, talking rapidly about wedding plans and guest lists. Of course, we'll need to keep the ceremony somewhat intimate, she said, shooting a meaningful glance in my direction. Marcus's family moves in very exclusive circles, and we want to make sure everyone feels comfortable. Some people just naturally fit into certain social environments better than others. The implication was crystal clear. I would not be part of the wedding party, possibly not even invited to the reception. Emma had found her ticket to the life she had always believed she deserved, and she wasn't about to let family obligations compromise her new social standing. That's completely understandable, our mother said quietly, though her eyes reflected the hurt she was trying to hide. It's your special day, sweetheart. I remained silent, remembering all the nights I had worked double shifts to pay for law school, while Emma sailed through her communications degree on our parents' savings and student loans they couldn't really afford. I thought about the years I had spent clerking for judges who taught me that real power was quiet, respectful, and earned through dedication rather than inherited through connections or acquired through marriage. Don't worry, though, Jed, Emma added with false sweetness. I'm sure we can find some way for you to be involved. Maybe you could help with parking or something practical like that. Marcus's phone buzzed and he glanced at it with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to being constantly available to clients. His expression shifted slightly as he read the message, but he slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned his attention to the table. I'm curious about your family's professional backgrounds, he said, his tone suggesting this was casual dinner conversation rather than what felt increasingly like an interview. Emma mentioned you worked for the Postal Service, sir. He directed this question toward our father, who nodded with the quiet dignity of a man who had spent 35 years ensuring that people received their mail regardless of weather holidays or personal convenience. 35 years, Dad confirmed. Started as a carrier, worked my way up to supervisor before retirement. Good, steady work union benefits. Nothing glamorous, but it put food on the table and sent both kids to college. And Mrs. Henderson, you work in accounting. Our mother's smile was strained. Bookkeeping, actually. Part-time for a small medical practice. Dr. Morrison's office on Maple Street. I help with billing and insurance claims. Marcus nodded with the polite interest of someone mentally categorizing people into professional hierarchies. In his world, postal workers and part-time bookkeepers were invisible service providers, the people who made his comfortable life possible, but whom he never actually had to consider as equals. It's wonderful how Emma turned out so ambitious, despite humble beginnings. He said, apparently intending this as a compliment. She's got natural leadership instincts, real executive potential. Emma practically glowed under this praise, sitting up straighter and unconsciously mimicking Marcus's confident posture. I've always known I was meant for bigger things, she said. My marketing director position is really just the beginning. Marcus thinks I could easily transition into luxury real estate or maybe corporate communications. The key is networking. Marcus explained, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering obvious wisdom to people too simple to have figured it out themselves. Success is about positioning yourself around the right people, learning from those who have already achieved what you want to achieve. You can't let family loyalty hold you back if they're not operating at your level. The cruelty of this statement, delivered so casually while our parents sat right there, left me momentarily speechless. Emma nodded eagerly, apparently oblivious to the fact that Marcus was essentially telling her to abandon the people who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. Exactly, she agreed. You have to be realistic about people's limitations. Some people are content with small lives, and that's fine. But you can't let their lack of ambition drag you down. Marcus's phone buzzed again, and this time his glance at the screen lasted longer. His eyebrows drew together slightly, and he looked up at me with increased attention. Jed, you mentioned administrative work in the courthouse district. Do you work directly for the city, or is it county government? Federal, I replied simply. Federal bureaucracy, Marcus said with the knowing smile of someone who believed he understood how government worked. That's where the real job security is, right? Benefits, pension, regular hours. I imagine the pace is pretty relaxed compared to private sector. Emma giggled. Jed's always been the cautious type. He probably has his whole career mapped out until retirement. Same desk, same routine, same small paycheck every 2 weeks for the next 30 years. A man in an expensive suit approached our table, and Marcus looked up with surprised recognition. David, what are you doing here? The man smiled broadly. Partner's dinner got moved here last minute. The usual place had a kitchen fire. He gestured toward a large table across the restaurant where several other well-dressed professionals were engaged in animated conversation. Mind if I say hello to your lovely fiancé? Marcus stood to shake hands with his colleague. David Morrison, meet Emma Henderson, my fiancé, and this is her family. David nodded politely to Emma and our parents, then extended his hand to me. David Morrison, Morrison Clark, and Associates. Jed Henderson, I replied, shaking his hand. David's expression changed subtly, and he tilted his head as if trying to place something. Jed Henderson? That name sounds familiar. Do we know each other professionally? Marcus laughed. I doubt it. Jed works in government administration. Probably never had occasion to cross paths with corporate law. David continued studying my face. Henderson, Federal Courthouse District. Wait a minute. His eyes widened slightly and he leaned closer to Marcus. Could I speak with you privately for just a moment? Marcus looked puzzled, but followed David a few steps away from the table. I watched as David spoke quietly but urgently into Marcus's ear, gesturing discreetly in my direction. Marcus's confident expression gradually transformed into something approaching concern, then what looked suspiciously like panic. When they returned to the table, Marcus's entire demeanor had shifted. His casual arrogance had been replaced by a nervous energy that he was trying unsuccessfully to hide. He kept glancing at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Everything all right? Emma asked, noticing the change in her fiancé's behavior. Fine, Marcus said quickly. Just some business complications. Nothing that can't be handled. But David wasn't quite ready to let the moment pass. Mr. Henderson, I have to ask. Do you by any chance work at the federal courthouse on 5th Street? I do, I confirmed. Emma rolled her eyes. See, I told you he was modest about his little government job. Jed's always been secretive about work. Probably afraid we'll be too impressed by his very important filing responsibilities. David and Marcus exchanged a look that Emma completely missed. David excused himself and returned to his colleagues, but not before giving me a respectful nod that seemed to leave Marcus even more unsettled. So, anyway, Emma continued, oblivious to the undercurrents now flowing through the conversation. Marcus was telling me about the country club his family belongs to. They have a golf course designed by some famous architect, and the membership waiting list is apparently years long. She launched into detailed descriptions of the luxury lifestyle she was about to enter, painting pictures of charity galas and weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard. Marcus nodded along mechanically, but his attention kept drifting back to me with an expression I was beginning to recognize as dawning professional dread. Emma was in full performance mode, now describing the wedding venue Marcus's family had secured through their social connections. "It's this gorgeous estate in Westchester County," she gushed. "The grounds are absolutely stunning, and they only host a few select events each year." Marcus's mother had to call in several favors just to get us on the calendar. Our parents listened with the mixture of pride and bewilderment that had characterized their relationship with Emma's ambitions for years. They were happy for her success, but increasingly aware that her new life would have little room for their modest existence. Marcus's phone buzzed a third time, and this time he answered it despite the social awkwardness of taking calls during dinner. "Excuse me," he said, rising from his chair. "This is urgent." While he stepped away from the table, Emma seized the opportunity to deliver what she clearly considered the coup de grace of her evening's entertainment. "You know what the funniest part is?" she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow managed to carry to neighboring tables. "Jed makes less in a year than Marcus spends on his car payments." "Isn't that incredible?" I found out when Mom accidentally mentioned his salary range last month. She proceeded to share specific numbers that made our parents shift uncomfortably in their chairs. The figures weren't entirely accurate, but they were close enough to be embarrassing and far enough below Marcus's income to make her point devastatingly clear. "And he's 32 years old," she continued, warming to her theme. "Most people his age are buying houses, starting families, building real wealth. But Jed's still renting that tiny one-bedroom apartment near downtown. I swear the place is smaller than Marcus's walk-in closet." Our mother finally spoke up. "Emma, honey, maybe we could talk about something else." "Oh, come on, Mom. It's not like any of this is secret. Besides, Marcus should know what he's getting into with our family. Better to be honest about everyone's situation, right?" She launched into stories from our college years describing how I had worked as a night custodian in the law library to help pay tuition. She made these sacrifices sound pathetic rather than admirable, painting a picture of someone too proud or too foolish to accept a more realistic assessment of his limitations. "The best part," she continued, "is that he still acts like those years studying law were somehow preparation for bigger things, like pushing papers in a government office requires a law degree from Harvard. Talk about overqualification." This casual mention of Harvard seemed to register with our father, who looked up sharply. He had forgotten in the face of Emma's relentless mockery that his son's educational achievements were actually quite remarkable. Marcus returned from his phone call, looking pale and distracted. He sat down heavily and reached immediately for his wine glass, draining it in 2 large swallows. "Bad news?" Emma asked, though her concern seemed more focused on how his mood might affect her evening than on his actual well-being. "Complicated client situation," Marcus replied. "Some issues with a federal court filing that need immediate attention." Emma nodded sympathetically, but quickly steered the conversation back to wedding planning. "Anyway, I was just telling everyone about the catering budget. Marcus's family insists on using this exclusive company that handles all the high society events in the area. The menu alone is going to cost more than some people make in 6 months." She shot me a meaningful look to ensure I understood that I was included in the category of people who made less in 6 months than she planned to spend on wedding food. "The guest list is going to be amazing," she continued. "Senators, judges, Fortune 500 executives." Marcus's father's connections are just incredible. Of course, we'll need to be very selective about +1s and family invitations. You understand how these things work in sophisticated circles. Marcus was barely listening. He kept checking his phone and glancing around the restaurant as if expecting unwelcome news to arrive at any moment. His earlier confidence had evaporated, completely replaced by a nervous energy that was becoming increasingly difficult to hide. "Marcus, are you feeling all right?" our mother asked with genuine concern. "Fine," he said quickly. "Just some work pressure." You know how it is in corporate law. Clients expect immediate solutions to complex problems. Emma leaned over to rub his shoulder reassuringly. "Poor baby. This is exactly why I'm so grateful Jed chose government work. No stress, no pressure, No real responsibility. He gets to clock in, do his little administrative tasks, and clock out without a care in the world. Sometimes I think there's something to be said for a simple life. The patronizing sympathy in her voice was almost worse than her earlier cruelty. She genuinely believed she was being generous by finding positive aspects to my supposed mediocrity. Marcus looked directly at me for the first time since David's whispered conversation. Jed, I have to ask, what exactly do you do at the federal courthouse? I mean, what's your specific job title? Emma laughed before I could answer. Oh, don't encourage him to get all official about it. Jed always makes his work sound more important than it really is. It's sweet, actually. He talks about cases and proceedings, like he's actually involved in the legal process instead of just maintaining the filing systems. I'd like to hear from Jed directly. Marcus insisted, his voice carrying a tension that Emma continued to misread completely. The entire table fell silent, waiting for my response. Emma wore an indulgent smile, clearly anticipating another opportunity to demonstrate the gap between my aspirations and my reality. Our parents looked uncomfortable but curious, and Marcus watched me with an expression that suggested he already suspected what I was about to say, but desperately hoped he was wrong. I looked around the table at my family, taking in Emma's expectant smirk, our parents' confused concern, and Marcus's barely concealed anxiety. The moment felt suspended in time, heavy with years of accumulated assumptions and misunderstandings. Judge, I said simply. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Emma's smile froze on her face, unsure whether this was a joke she was supposed to laugh at. Our parents looked puzzled, trying to process information that didn't fit their understanding of their son's life. And Marcus went completely white, his wine glass stopping halfway to his lips. Very funny, Emma said after a moment, forcing a laugh that sounded increasingly hollow. What's next? Are you going to tell us you're Judge Judy? Come on, Jed. We all know what you really do. But Marcus wasn't laughing. He set his wine glass down with shaking hands and stared at me with the expression of a man watching his career flash before his eyes. United States District Judge for the Southern District of New York. I continued quietly. I was confirmed by the Senate 3 years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade as my family struggled to process this information. Emma's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her brain apparently unable to reconcile this revelation with the narrative she had constructed about my life. Marcus found his voice first. Your Honor. He began, then stopped himself. I mean Judge Henderson. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. My firm Morrison Clark and Associates, we regularly appear before the federal courts. We have nothing but the highest respect for the judiciary. His transformation was immediate and complete. The condescending investment banker had vanished, replaced by a nervous attorney who suddenly understood that he had spent the evening insulting a federal judge in front of witnesses. This isn't possible, Emma whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She was beginning to understand that the joke wasn't on me after all. Our father leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped tightly on the table. Jed, is this true? Are you really a federal judge? I nodded. The administrative work I mentioned involves running the courthouse, managing the docket, overseeing court staff. It's quite a bit of administrative responsibility, actually. Our mother started crying, but they were tears of pride mixed with shame. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. All these years we thought you were just what, Mom, and just a disappointment, just someone who never lived up to Emma's achievements. The words came out more bitterly than I had intended, but years of family gatherings where my accomplishments were dismissed or ignored had taken their toll. I had learned to keep my professional life separate from my family, precisely because I was tired of having my choices minimized and my success measured against Emma's more visible achievements. Emma was frantically trying to salvage the situation. I knew, she said desperately. I mean, I knew Jed was successful. I was just being modest about it. You know how it is with family, you don't want to brag too much. Marcus wasn't buying it. Neither were our parents, who were beginning to remember years of conversations where Emma had systematically diminished my accomplishments and discouraged them from asking too many questions about my work. The courthouse where you work, Marcus said carefully, that's the Southern District Courthouse on 5th Street. That's right. And you preside over federal cases, criminal and civil, both. Corporate fraud, securities violations, civil rights cases, criminal prosecutions, the usual federal docket. Marcus's face went through several shades of pale as he mentally reviewed every disparaging comment he had made about government workers and public service careers. He was undoubtedly also thinking about his law firm's pending cases and wondering whether any of them might eventually appear on my docket. Other diners had begun to notice the drama unfolding at our table. Emma's earlier loud commentary about my supposed failures had attracted attention, and now people were openly staring as they tried to piece together what was happening. This is incredible, our father said, his voice filled with wonder. Our son is a federal judge. Do you understand what this means, Helen? Our Jed is one of the most important legal officials in the state. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, but so was the underlying sadness. He was realizing how much of my life he had missed, how many achievements he had failed to celebrate because he hadn't understood their significance. Emma was spiraling. But you never said anything. You let us all think you were just doing paperwork. You made us look like fools. I made you look like fools, I asked quietly. Emma, you've spent the entire evening telling everyone how pathetic my life is. You've mocked my income, my apartment, my education, my career choices. You've made it clear that I'm an embarrassment to the family. When exactly was I supposed to interrupt your performance to correct your assumptions? Marcus was now sweating visibly. Judge Henderson, please understand I had no idea about your position. If I said anything inappropriate or disrespectful, I sincerely apologize. My comments about government service were completely out of line. Your comments were honest reflections of your values, I replied. I appreciate the honesty, actually. Emma looked desperately around the table, searching for some way to regain control of the situation. This is all just a big misunderstanding, she said. We're family. We support each other. Right, Jed? Tell them we support each other. But support had been notably absent from our relationship for years, and everyone at the table knew it. Our parents were beginning to understand the extent to which they had allowed Emma's version of reality to shape their perception of both their children. The restaurant had grown quieter as more people became aware of the drama at our table. Servers whispered to each other near the kitchen, and I caught several people discreetly taking pictures with their phones. By tomorrow, this would be all over social media, and Marcus's professional reputation would be tied forever to his treatment of a federal judge. Emma excused herself to the restroom, and I watched her walk away with the unsteady gait of someone whose entire world had just shifted beneath her feet. Marcus immediately leaned across the table, his voice low and urgent. Judge Henderson, I need you to understand something. Everything I said tonight, every comment about your family or your career, it came from complete ignorance. I had absolutely no idea about your position or your background. I understand that, Marcus, your comments were based on the information you had been given. He glanced nervously toward the restroom. Emma told me you worked in filing or records management. She said you had never really found your direction after college, that you were the kind of person who was content with a small, stable job. I would never have spoken that way if I had known the truth. Our parents were listening to this exchange with growing understanding of how thoroughly Emma had misrepresented my life to her fiancé. The scope of her deception was becoming clear, and with it the cruelty of her evening's entertainment. She doesn't know, does she? Our mother asked quietly. Emma really has no idea what you do for a living. She's never asked, I replied. Whenever I try to talk about work, she changes the subject or makes jokes about government bureaucracy. It became easier to just let her assumptions stand rather than fight for her attention. Marcus's phone buzzed again, and he glanced at it with visible dread. That's David Morrison again. Word is already getting out about tonight. The legal community in the city is smaller than people think. As if summoned by our conversation, David Morrison appeared at our table again this time, accompanied by two other lawyers from his firm. Their approach was deferential, in a way that Marcus clearly recognized and feared. Judge Henderson, David said formally, I wanted to introduce you to my colleagues Sarah Chen and Michael Rodriguez from our federal practice group. The introductions were handled with the professional courtesy that attorneys always showed to federal judges, but I could see the confusion in their eyes as they tried to reconcile my presence at this family dinner with the gossip that was undoubtedly already circulating about Marcus's behavior. We were just discussing the Pemberton Industries case, Sarah mentioned. The one where you issued that landmark ruling on corporate disclosure requirements. Brilliant legal reasoning, Your Honor. Emma returned from the restroom to find three attorneys treating her brother with the kind of respect usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. Her attempt to reinsert herself into the conversation was painful to watch. Oh, good, you've met my brother, she said brightly. Jed and I were just talking about how proud the family is of his success. I've been telling Marcus for months that Jed was being modest about his achievements. The lawyers exchanged glances. They were clearly aware that Marcus had been complaining about his fiancé's loser family for weeks. Emma's transparent attempt to rewrite history wasn't fooling anyone. Actually, Michael Rodriguez said carefully, we were hoping to discuss some procedural questions about upcoming federal filings if you have a moment, Your Honor. Emma beamed as if she were personally responsible for facilitating this important legal consultation. Of course, Jed loves talking about work. Don't you, Jed? He's always been so dedicated to public service. The revisionist narrative she was constructing on the fly would have been amusing if it weren't so desperately sad. She was scrambling to reposition herself as the supportive sister who had always recognized my potential, but everyone at the table had witnessed her systematic cruelty throughout the evening. Marcus was growing increasingly agitated as more of his colleagues became aware of the situation. His phone was buzzing constantly now, and I could see him mentally calculating the professional damage he had inflicted on himself. Emma, he said quietly, we need to talk privately. Can it wait? She asked, still basking in the reflected glory of suddenly having an important brother. This is such a wonderful family moment. No, it can't wait. The tone of his voice finally penetrated her euphoria, and she looked at him with the first genuine concern she had shown all evening. Is something wrong? Marcus stood up and walked toward the restaurant's entrance, clearly expecting her to follow. Emma hesitated, torn between her desire to continue playing the role of proud sister and her growing awareness that her fiancé was seriously upset. I'll be right back, she said to the table. We're probably just discussing wedding details. But through the restaurant's large windows, we could all see that the conversation outside was anything but celebratory. Marcus was gesticulating angrily, while Emma stood frozen in apparent shock. Their body language told the story of a relationship in crisis. Our father reached across the table and touched my hand. Son, I owe you an apology. We both do. We let Emma convince us that your quiet nature meant you weren't successful. We should have asked more questions. We should have been more supportive. You raised me to work hard and treat people with respect, I replied. That's what led to whatever success I've achieved. You did everything right. Our mother was still crying, but now her tears seemed to be equal parts pride and regret. All those times you tried to tell us about important cases or legal precedents, and we just nodded politely and changed the subject. We thought you were trying to make your job sound more interesting than it was. The lawyers had discreetly withdrawn to give our family privacy, but their presence in the restaurant ensured that news of the evening's events would spread quickly through the legal community. Marcus's reputation was already damaged beyond repair. Emma returned alone, her face streaked with tears, and her confident demeanor completely shattered. She collapsed into her chair without looking at anyone. "He broke up with me," she announced to the table. "Marcus said I'm cruel and dishonest, and that tonight proved we have incompatible values. He said his family was right to have concerns about my background." The irony was devastating. Emma's attempt to demonstrate her superiority over her family had destroyed her chance to escape that background. Her cruelty toward me had cost her the relationship she valued above everything else. He said I humiliated a federal judge in public, and that everyone in the legal community will know about it by morning. He said I made him look like an idiot, and that his firm's reputation could be affected. Our parents looked stricken, unsure how to comfort their daughter, while also processing their own feelings about her behavior. The evening had revealed aspects of Emma's character that were difficult to reconcile with their image of her as their successful, ambitious child. "Emma," I said gently, "I'm sorry about Marcus. But you need to understand that this isn't my fault. Your relationship ended because of choices you made, not because I revealed information about my career." She looked up at me with eyes full of anger and pain. "You could have stopped this. You could have told me who you were before I embarrassed myself." "When?" I asked. "When you were mocking my education? When you were sharing details about my income? When you were explaining to your fiancé why I wasn't good enough to be in your wedding? At what point was I supposed to interrupt your performance?" The truth was harsh, but necessary. Emma had created this situation through years of systematic cruelty, and she needed to understand that actions had consequences even within families. The ride home was conducted in heavy silence. Emma's car had refused to start in the restaurant parking lot, adding mechanical failure to her evening of personal disasters. She sat in the backseat of our parents' car, staring out the window at the passing streetlights with the hollow expression of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. Our father kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, and I could see him processing decades of assumptions about his children. He was beginning to understand that the son he thought lacked ambition had actually surpassed every expectation, while the daughter he considered his greatest success had revealed a capacity for cruelty that shocked him. "Jed," he said quietly, "when you were confirmed as a federal judge, was there a ceremony, some kind of official swearing in?" "Yes, at the courthouse. Chief Judge Williams administered the oath." "Were we invited?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. The truth was that I had stopped sharing important milestones with my family years earlier, tired of having my achievements minimized or overshadowed by Emma's latest drama. "I wasn't sure you'd be interested," I replied honestly. Family gatherings had become pretty focused on Emma's career and social life. I figured you had more important things to worry about. Our mother turned in her seat to face me. "We missed our son becoming a federal judge because we were too wrapped up in Emma's marketing job to pay attention to what you were accomplishing." The devastation in her voice was unmistakable. She was realizing that while they celebrated Emma's relatively minor professional achievements, they had completely ignored their son's rise to one of the most prestigious positions in the American legal system. Emma finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been a judge?" 3 years. I was nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate when I was 29. It was covered in all the major legal publications and several newspapers." "I don't understand," she said. "How is this possible?" "You were working at that law firm after college doing research or something. How did you go from that to being a federal judge?" The question revealed the extent of her ignorance about my life. She had no idea that my research job had been a clerkship with Supreme Court Justice Thomas, one of the most prestigious positions available to young lawyers. She didn't know about the years I had spent in the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecuting federal crimes or the landmark cases I had handled as a federal prosecutor. After my clerkship with Justice Thomas, I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office. I explained. I spent 5 years prosecuting federal crimes before moving into private practice with Davis Stern and Associates. When Judge Morrison announced his retirement, I was nominated to fill his position. Each revelation seemed to hit Emma like a physical blow. She was learning that while she mocked my supposed lack of ambition, I had been building one of the most distinguished early careers in American law. Our father pulled into the driveway of their modest, suburban home, and we all sat in the car for a moment, unsure how to end an evening that had fundamentally changed our family dynamics. "I need to ask you something, Emma," our mother said, turning to face her daughter. "Did you know about any of this? Did you know about Jed's real career and choose to hide it from us?" Emma's silence was answer enough. She had known enough to understand that my work was more significant than she pretended, but she had deliberately minimized my achievements to maintain her position as the family's success story. "You let us miss our son's greatest achievements because you were jealous." Our father said, his voice filled with a disappointment that seemed to age him years in moments. "I wasn't jealous," Emma protested weakly. "I just thought, we were all doing well in our own ways. There was no reason to make a big deal about everything." But her protests rang hollow. The truth was evident to everyone in the car. Emma had systematically suppressed information about my success to preserve her status as the family's primary source of pride. We went inside the house and I found myself looking around the familiar rooms with new eyes. The walls were covered with photographs and mementos from Emma's life graduation pictures, cheerleading trophies, newspaper clippings from her marketing campaigns. There were no visible reminders of my achievements, no indication that the family had any reason to be proud of their son. Emma disappeared into her old bedroom, and we could hear her making frantic phone calls, presumably, to friends who might offer sympathy for her romantic disaster. But word of the evening's events was already spreading through her social circle, and I suspected she would find little comfort there. Our parents and I sat in the living room trying to process the magnitude of what had been revealed. The silence was broken only by the sound of Emma's muffled sobs from upstairs. "I don't understand how we got this so wrong," our mother said finally. "How did we become the kind of parents who ignored one child's success while enabling another child's cruelty?" "You're not bad parents," I assured them. "Emma is charming and outgoing, and her achievements are easy to understand and celebrate. My work is more complicated to explain, and I stopped trying to share it when I realized you weren't really interested." Our father shook his head. "We failed you, son. We let Emma's personality overshadow your substance, and we created a family dynamic where her opinion mattered more than the truth." The conversation continued late into the evening, with my parents asking detailed questions about my career and expressing amazement at opportunities and achievements they had never known to celebrate. They were good people who had been manipulated by a daughter who refused to share the spotlight even with her own brother. Emma eventually emerged from her room, her eyes red from crying, but her expression hardened with a new kind of desperation. "I need your help," she said to me without preamble. "Marcus won't return my calls, and I think he's going to spread this story all over the city. You're a judge now. You have influence. You could talk to him. Explain that tonight was just a misunderstanding." The audacity of her request was breathtaking. After spending years undermining my achievements and an entire evening humiliating me in public, she expected me to use my position to clean up her mess. "Emma, I can't and won't interfere in your personal relationships. And even if I could, why would you want to marry someone who would abandon you the moment he learned about your family's true background?" "Because I love him," she said desperately. "Because this was my chance to have the life I've always wanted. Because you don't understand what it's like to have everything you've worked for destroyed in one night." The lack of self-awareness was staggering. Emma still couldn't see that she had destroyed her own relationship through her treatment of others. She was looking for someone else to blame someone else to fix the consequences of her choices. Our parents exchanged a look that suggested they were finally seeing their daughter clearly, for the first time in years. The golden child who could do no wrong had revealed herself to be capable of stunning cruelty and shocking selfishness. The next morning brought a reckoning that none of us had anticipated. I arrived at my parents' house to find Emma sitting at the kitchen table, with her laptop open, her face pale with a different kind of shock than the night before. "I've been researching you," she said without looking up from the screen. "I found articles about cases you've presided over, legal journals discussing your rulings, news stories about your nomination and confirmation. Jed, you're actually famous in legal circles." She scrolled through page after page of professional recognition Supreme Court clerkship announcements and coverage of high-profile cases I had handled. The scope of my achievements laid out in black and white seemed to overwhelm her completely. "You turned down partnerships at 3 major law firms to become a federal prosecutor." She continued reading from one article. "You graduated first in your class from Harvard Law School. You wrote law review articles that are still cited as precedent. You're considered one of the most promising young jurists in the country." Our parents sat down beside her, also seeing the full scope of my career for the first time. The pride on their faces was mixed with profound regret for all the celebrations they had missed, all the achievements they had failed to acknowledge. "There's a picture here from your confirmation ceremony," our mother said softly. "You look so serious and dignified in your robes. We should have been there. We should have been the proudest parents in the room." Emma closed the laptop and looked at me with something approaching genuine remorse. "I destroyed my relationship with Marcus, but that's not even the worst part. The worst part is realizing that I've been treating my brother like he was a failure when he was actually more successful than I could ever dream of being." "Success isn't a competition, Emma." "Isn't it, though?" she asked. "I spent my whole life trying to be the star of this family, and it turns out you've been a constellation, while I was just a flickering candle." The metaphor was surprisingly poetic, for Emma suggesting that the crisis was forcing her to think more deeply about herself and her relationships than she had in years. "I need to ask you something honestly," she continued. "How many times did you try to share your accomplishments with us only to have me dismiss them or change the subject?" I thought about it carefully. "Hundreds, probably. Every family gathering where I mentioned work, every time I tried to explain why I was passionate about the law, every achievement I hoped might finally earn your respect, or at least your attention. And I shut you down every time. Usually with a joke about government bureaucracy or a comment about how boring legal work must be." Emma put her head in her hands. "I've been a terrible sister. Not just inconsiderate or selfish, but actively cruel. I turned our parents against you without them even realizing it was happening. Our father spoke up. That's not entirely your fault, sweetheart. We should have been paying closer attention. We should have asked more questions and made our own judgments about both of our children's lives. But I made it easy for you to ignore Jed," Emma said. "I monopolized every conversation, made every gathering about my life and my achievements. I created a family dynamic where there wasn't room for anyone else to be successful or important. The honesty was painful, but necessary." Emma was finally confronting the reality of her behavior and its impact on the people who loved her most. "The worst part," she continued, "is that I think I knew. Deep down, I think I always suspected that Jed was more successful than he let on. But I didn't want to know the truth because it would have meant admitting that I wasn't the special one anymore." Our mother reached over and took Emma's hand. "You're both special, sweetheart. You're both successful in different ways. We just lost sight of that somehow." "No, Mom, I lost sight of it. I made sure you lost sight of it too." Emma's phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at it with visible dread. "That's my supervisor at work. She wants to see me first thing Monday morning. Apparently word about last night has reached my office." The professional consequences were beginning to manifest. Emma's marketing firm regularly worked with legal clients, and her public humiliation of a federal judge would not be viewed favorably by partners who depended on maintaining good relationships with the legal community. "I'll probably lose my job," she said quietly. "The irony is perfect. I spent the whole evening mocking Jed's career, while mine was being destroyed by my own behavior. You might not lose your job, I said, but you'll probably face some difficult conversations about professional conduct and client relations. Emma nodded. I deserve whatever happens. I just wish I could undo last night. Not because of the consequences, but because I hate knowing that I'm the kind of person who could treat her own brother that way. The regret seemed genuine, which was more than I had expected from someone who had rarely shown remorse for her actions in the past. Crisis had a way of forcing people to confront aspects of themselves they preferred to ignore. Over the following weeks, Emma did indeed face professional consequences. Her firm placed her on probation after several clients expressed concern about her judgment and character. Marcus spread word of the incident throughout his social circle, ensuring that Emma's reputation suffered in precisely the circles she had been so eager to join. But something unexpected happened during this period of professional and social exile. Emma began volunteering at a legal aid clinic initially as a way to demonstrate her commitment to legal ethics, but gradually developing a genuine interest in helping people who couldn't afford quality legal representation. She started taking night classes in paralegal studies, discovering that she had more intellectual curiosity than she had ever allowed herself to explore. Her marketing skills proved valuable in helping the clinic communicate more effectively with clients and donors. 6 months after our disastrous family dinner, Emma met Thomas Rivera, a public defender, who was immediately impressed by her dedication to social justice causes. Their relationship developed, slowly built on shared values rather than social aspirations. Our parents began attending my speaking engagements and court ceremonies, making up for years of missed opportunities to celebrate my achievements. They learned to ask informed questions about my work and to take pride in their son's contributions to American jurisprudence. The family dinners that resumed several months later were different from anything we had experienced before. Conversations were more balanced, with each person's accomplishments and interests receiving genuine attention and respect. Emma had learned to listen as much as she talked, and our parents had learned to value substance over style. Emma's wedding to Thomas was a small ceremony held in a community garden reflecting their shared commitment to environmental sustainability and social justice. I had the honor of walking her down the aisle, symbolizing not just our renewed relationship, but the family's commitment to supporting each other's authentic selves rather than projected images of success. The evening that had begun with Emma's cruel mockery had ultimately forced our family to confront fundamental questions about love's success and the values that truly mattered. We learned that genuine achievement required integrity and service to others, not just personal advancement at any cost. In my judicial robes, I had found not just professional success, but the opportunity to serve justice and protect the vulnerable. Emma, in her paralegal studies and legal aid work, had discovered that helping others was more fulfilling than impressing them. Our parents learned that both their children were worthy of pride, just in different ways. The lesson that emerged from our family crisis was simple, but profound. True success is measured not by wealth or social status, but by the positive impact we have on others and the integrity with which we live our lives. When we base our relationships on authentic care rather than competitive achievement, we create space for everyone to flourish. Looking back, I realized that Emma's cruel performance at that restaurant dinner was actually a gift, though none of us recognized it at the time. It forced our family to abandon the pretenses that had been poisoning our relationships for years and to build something healthier on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. Sometimes the most painful moments in our lives become the catalysts for the most important growth. Our family learned to value each other, not for what we achieved, but for who we truly were beneath all the achievements and disappointments. As I write this story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members or loved ones underestimated your worth or dismissed your achievements? How did you handle it, And what did you learn about the difference between seeking validation and staying true to your values? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who's facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming family challenges and finding your authentic path to success, and share this with someone who might benefit from hearing about second chances and the power of honest communication. Thank you for listening to our family's journey from dysfunction to healing. Remember that it's never too late to build better relationships based on truth, respect, and genuine love for each other's authentic selves. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who matter most to you.